and we equip and empower educators so that they can be able to lead transformation in their schools. And we do this by offering professional leadership training development that's accompanied by in-school instructional coaching. We've been offering this professional training from 2011, and we partner mainly with the public primary schools in informal locations or marginalized communities. So from 2011 to date, we have graduated over 3,000 educators across 781 schools who are eligible to be part of a Dignitas alumni team. As Dignitas, we recognize the benefits of having an alumni network. We see the alumni network's role as that of extending Dignitas' impact in the various communities where we've had these schools, and we see them as ambassadors of change on one hand, and on the other one, we also see the alumni as a network that can provide each other with peer support and accountability that is needed so that they can continue to spur improvements in the schools. We see our role actually as that of strengthening and leveraging the alumni to be one that is engaged, inclusive, and transformative so that it can also provide benefits for its members. So if we look at our alumni journey, we were set up in 2019. And when we set up the alumni network in 2019, we also installed an executive leadership committee so that they can be able to run it. And in 2020, together with the executive, we co-created some set of bylaws so that they could govern the association. We provided the executive with support, both technical support on how they could be able to build the program and actually engage the larger alumni. We undertook a capacity assessment so that we could understand their skill set, what they needed, where the gaps are, and then support them to run the network. And then later on, the association that had been created was introduced to the other educators that had graduated around 2020, 2021, attempted to have online sessions and meetings, and though these ones were only attended by a minimal participants out of the thousands that we had trained. So we played both an implementing role as well as an advisory role to be able to support the executive so that they could be able to design a way forward and put in place benefits that would actually mean something for them. But we found in that process, we were doing most of the heavy lifting. The other challenge that we had faced was that we had drawn the executive from a group of peer educators that we had used continually in our trainings, where they were incentivized, a small facilitation given to be able to train and attend the meetings. And so they constantly felt that they needed to be incentivized so that they could be able to drive the network. And we, on the other hand, felt that this was not going to be sustainable in the long run. We had hoped that, once we set the association, we co-create, that there were clear structures in place. We provided the advisory and the technical support. We gave a little bit of funds to undertake the activities, that the network would incrementally grow and run as an independent association. But despite all that, we found that it did not take off as we envisaged. There were also a little bit of disagreements between the executives. So not everyone had really bought into the idea, yet we thought they were. So while we as an organization, we have a culture where we review our strategy, and we believe as part of that review, we need to make it dynamic, we need to open it to scrutiny, we need to systematically challenge it so that we may remain relevant. So our current model needs a bit of helping hand, and we are back at the re-strategizing phase so that we can see how to push the network, because we do see its potential in extending our impact. So that is what brings us here this evening, to be able to share our journey, to be able to share the challenges that we have, and to be able to seek guidance. So as part of that process, we have got a couple of questions that we think would be important for us. The first one is, how do we maintain the momentum as we are in this re-strategizing phase of our alumni network? How do we ensure greater uptake and engagement amongst these potential alumni that have been part of our training program for either a year or 2 years? They've seen the benefits, they've seen the shifts in practices, but how do we just build that engagement so that they can join in? Secondly, we have been looking around to try and find some best models of practice, especially around professional educators, alumni association. What we tend to find often are examples from university, college associations that slightly differ from our professional educators model. The second big question that we have is, how do we sustain this impact beyond the program cycle? We seek an alumni that is vibrant, that continues to engage on the ground, and that continues to have these practices, not only in the schools where these educators were trained or were picked from, but within the communities around. So how do we promote that internal drive and create self-generated momentum so that the network is less driven by Dignitas and more driven by the alumni? What are some of the best approaches to measure and track our network impact? Are there some specific elements that we ought to look out for so that we can be able to say, once we have set our vision and we know exactly the benefits that will accrue, how do we measure to ensure that we continue to be engaged? So those are our challenges this evening. And yeah, we hope we can be able to find some solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. And for those who entered as Faith was speaking, just Faith was introducing, as you saw, as you sort of shared in chat, her challenge, and now we're moving to the next stage where Andy, Gillian, and Pauline will ask some questions. And what I'll invite all of the rest of you to do, again, we're going to invite all audience members to share some suggestions. So most importantly, start writing down some suggestions you have for Faith, but don't share in chat yet. We'll ask you all to share at a certain point after we've gone through the process with the 4 that you see on your screen. But at this moment, if you do have any questions for Faith that are about clarifying or getting more information, feel free to pop them in the chat. If we're able to answer them, we will. We might not be able to answer them, so we'll see. But for now, Andy, Gillian, and Pauline, you'll have about 10 minutes or so to ask some questions. I recommend going one by one. Ask Faith a question, she'll answer, and then the next person. Go ahead, Pauline.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Faith, for this very well structured and clear presentation of your activities. I think one of the elements that will be core for us to discuss is the executives that you discussed. Can you clarify exactly who they are, where they come from, how many they are, and what is the exact mandate that they have in their hands?
So the executive is a small leadership committee that have gone through our training for a 2-year period, and we pick them from a group of exemplary educators that we use as peer educators to support us in ongoing professional training programs after they had actually graduated. And
so they are alumni themselves, right?
They are alumni themselves, yes. So they are alumni themselves. They are six in number. So there is a chair, there is a vice, there's a secretary, a treasurer, an organizing secretary. And their mandate was to be able to grow, to be able to sort of invite others as part of the network members, but also to sit as this executive group to design benefits that could really accrue to the educators within the communities. And when we mean communities here, they're from different locations within the informal area. So that is what we refer to as community. So each community has got issues or priorities that differ. So their role was to be able to find out what is it that really is our priority. And so that is what we call the executive.
Okay, and one quick follow-up question. You mentioned about some incentives that you had to set up for this executive committee. Can you mention the incentives that you set up for them?
Yeah, so for the peer educators, because we've got them from the exemplary peer educators, so anytime they would come for our training, we would give them, it's sort of like a small fee to allow them to provide for mainly for transport and to appreciate their time to be spend a whole day with us, because they are basically educators. There was access to tools and resources that they could be able to use either for their schools or as part of their them being leaders. Secondly, there was a bit of training for them on specific areas where they had gaps. So both monetary in terms of the incentives, as well as access to tools and resources to advise and to train.
Thank you, Faith.
Faith, I'll just jump in quickly. You said there was a program of engagements. I just wanted to find out a little bit more about what that program looks like, what kind of strategies you have in place, who decides on those strategies, and how they're working. That's quite a lot of questions, but basically just what are you doing at the moment, and how is it working?
So maybe I can begin with what we are doing at the moment. At the moment, we have totally taken a break so that we could be able to relook the model, because the model had been set up as an association where we had hoped that this would end up being an independent organization. We grow them to be an independent organization, we handhold, and then after a couple of a defined period of time, then we provide them initially with funds to run. So the program of engagement included a lot of series of meetings where we first sat down to figure out what is the membership, what are the objectives, what it is that they would want to continue impacting on the ground over and above, the trainings that they had received. So a series of meetings, initially with the executive, then later on with a few members that had joined in. So like bonding and visioning engagement exercises. Then we went ahead to create a plan of action for a period of around 6 months, where we expected them then to be able to take that up and run with it. And in terms of who did the decision, it was joint because they were the executive. So we played the role of advisory and sending them, probing question, what it is that is a priority, where does the shoe pinch the most, what would you want to see, what impact do you seek? And then out of that, they would made a decision and then a plan in terms of the priority. We did give them a guidance in terms of when we expected feedback, and provided a bit of funding as well for them to be able to meet and to be able to run those activities, and then they would bring the feedback.
And just a final question, sorry, Andy. I just want to clarify, when you invited like exemplary members, peer educators, and they could opt in or opt out, but it was by invitation to be part of the exec. Is that correct?
There was actually an application process. we didn't take it for granted. So we had a pool of peer facilitators, and we asked whoever would be interested in taking up a leadership position, then they would apply. So we looked at those applications and we chose a team that we thought was strong enough to be able to run. They commanded a bit of the, they had the leadership skills, they were exemplary, and so we chose them from the applications that they had put through.
Thanks.
Hi, Faith. Thank you for this interesting information. I want to ask about performance indicators or metrics. You mentioned measurement, and I'm wondering if you had at the outset, if the executive or if you had set a definition of success that you would look at and recognize, oh, after our first year or 2 years, we know that we're succeeding because we've achieved A, B, C. And if those things were sort of qualitative or quantitative, I'm just wondering kind of what KPIs you're using or what metrics you use for defining success and how you know whether or not you're meeting those. Because it sounds like you think you're not, but I'm just wondering what it would look like if you were.
Yeah, so in terms of the KPIs, we had not, other than having a plan of action in place with very set timelines, and having a WhatsApp group where would be able to send questions and then the members would be able to respond. We had not put concretely some of those measures. And I think one of the things that kept coming up is, how do you measure the level of engagement? Is it somebody that has gone onto a WhatsApp group, you see they have seen and they agree with you? So how do you actually know they're getting engaged? So while we set up the objectives of what we had hoped they would do, they had a plan of action and activities with a timeline that were not honored. I can't say that we were able to come up with very clear KPIs or indicators of success, other than the fact that we had hoped that those activities would pick up, and they didn't.
Yeah. Okay, and then different topic about governance. You mentioned that the executive, that you have bylaws and that this group is officially impaneled as an official body. Is that a legal requirement, or is that simply something that you thought would be a good idea to make it more official and somehow more of a well-defined organization?
Sense that it is registered. But when you look at the definition of an association, and in our context in Kenya, an association would need to grow and be able to have a governing structure and bylaws so that it could be registered independently. Then we were able to relook at that and see that we were not exactly sure we wanted it to be an association registered in that particular sense, because we wanted it to be more of a learning network, but having a governance in place that would be able to drive the different chapters, and the chapters here are the different communities. So if it is an association, the way we had envisioned it, we had thought it would be registered independently, but then thinking through it later, we were like, if it is an independent organization, how do we go back, especially when we say these are our agents of change? Can we still be able to go back to those schools and, where we had these educators? Can we be able to see instructional or their shift in practices? And that's why we started rethinking the model. Yeah.
I'm going to invite Pauline to ask, I saw her raise her finger, one last question, and then Andy, Gillian, and Pauline have a chance to kind of discuss ideas.
Thank you, Brendan. So it seems that we're, there are two levels. There's the executive, committee, and then there's the committee of alumni that they're supposed to engage. I don't think I've had very concretely a great idea of the activities that were implemented by the executive committee with the alumni community. Could you clarify that? Like, very concretely, what have they done so far with the alumni, with the other alumni?
Yeah, so with the other alumni was to pull them together so that they can be able to share and have specific plans or benefits that they wanted to have at their different communities. And this took a bit of engagement in the sense that when maybe I can explain a little bit about the structure. So these school leaders come from a particular community, and from within that community, we have 30 to 40 schools that are within one region. And one of the activities that they had proposed was they buy examinations to individual examinations. And so the question was, we are 40 schools within this particular communication. Can we not set up our own examinations and see how well we perform amongst each other? So there were several meetings where they tried to brainstorm and come up with very concrete benefits that they felt as a team would really guide them. So it's those meetings and those benefits and a clear plan of action. This is what we need to do for the next six months. However, that didn't quite didn't take off.
Thanks, Faith, for sharing all of your challenges. Honestly, I think these are challenges that all networks face in one way or another. But it's hard sometimes to admit it, because we often have to sell our work positively. So a big thanks for the honesty. What I'm going to ask you to do, Faith, is to turn off your video. I'm going to ask Andy, Gillian, and Pauline to unmute yourselves, and you are going to talk to each other about Faith. So don't talk to Faith about her challenge, but talk to each other as if you were sitting in a table and Faith was in another room, about questions you have or advice you have or suggestions you have. And you have about 9 to 10 minutes to do this. And the audience, again, in about 8 minutes, 7 minutes or so, I'll invite you to share in the chat additional suggestions. So start typing your suggestions, don't press enter yet, but also listen to Andy and Pauline and Gillian's suggestions so that you might add things or build on them. So then we're going to get for Faith this long list, wonderful list of suggestions. So go ahead, start talking to each other.
Starting point, food for thought for the rest of the conversation, my dear friends. One of the things that came to mind when, Faith was describing this governance structure. I work in the space of community engagement myself, and I find it very difficult to think and believe that engagement can happen without a dedicated operational person that is on the job in a full-time basis. So as much as it is absolutely desirable and very smart to engage alumni themselves as a core committee to contribute to designing the strategy and the way forward, operationally speaking, there needs to be, to my understanding, one or a core team of 1 or 2 or 3 people that operationally is there to engage the alumni as part of their dedicated mandate. So that was a first thought that came to mind. I don't know if you want to react.
Okay, I'll jump in. I so relate to many of the challenges that Faith has outlined, including that need for a kind of association and the formalizing of it. And sometimes we went through a similar process and found we had to sort of go back and unknit that formalized structure. And for us, a key piece of it was around the participation and the like, in order to sustain that engagement and that momentum that seems also to be one of the key success indicators is can this group of people become independent? It's really got to be kind of started at that very first level. And that process of how do you get that core team together who are going to be part of driving it forward is really an important piece. And, perhaps with the team that's going back to rethink the strategy could start there. So I think that's central to whether one is at sustained engagement going forward.
Yeah,
who's doing that and why and how and so on.
Yeah, it comes back to mission, right? Why organize at all? And I think, Gillian, to your point, building on that, I had a related thought, which was about structure, because a lot of Faith's comments were about creating, and that's why I asked about whether it's a legal requirement for an association to have bylaws and a governing executive and so on. Because sometimes I actually think you assume that the more structure you have, the more systematic and predictable and consistent an organization or a community's behavior can be. But sometimes I actually think there's too much structure, and that there's an aspect of that which is possibly generational, which is older baby boomers like me assume that you need to have an executive and you need to have officers assigned with roles, and that in fact more and more recent alumni or younger cohorts in different generations are more comfortable doing things informally. They're more comfortable organizing events or sending communications or sharing networks informally. And they don't assume that you need to have any kind of official organization at all. So I think asking how much structure is actually required is a good initial step, because you may rethink the model and have it be less of a top-down traditional hierarchical model and more of a ground-up, organic, grassroots sort of bottom-up activity that's not driven by a few people who applied to be on the executive, but instead is actually driven by some people on the front lines who are hands-on doers. And then later, the structure that's required to focus and direct their work in the right direction can be structured afterwards in response to what specific activities and tactics are being deployed. So it's not always design it and then see if that works. Sometimes it's do things and then evaluate, assess, and redesign as you go.
I was having similar thoughts, Andy, actually on this one, where I was wondering if this team of 6 executive committee members, by being appointed, would not mechanically, chosen through an application process, but would not mechanically prevent other alumni from showing up, right? So there is this potential risk taken of you empower a few to take the lead, and therefore maybe some others throughout the community, which is very broad of alumni, some others do not feel empowered or maybe having the space to actually contribute to the community of alumni. And a related thought was, I felt that when Faith was answering our questions, the committee was set up to design a plan that was to pull together other alumni to set up a plan. And I have seen throughout a couple of experiences that sometimes it is good to provide slightly more direction on concrete activities that the alumni community, not only the committee itself, but the alumni community and individuals into that community can actually take up. As you said, Andy, if I have the power to post on my social media, why do I post and how do I post it? If I have the space, maybe once a month, to have a one-on-one virtual or physical coffee discussion with another alumni or another, school leader that is currently being trained, then can I do that? I don't need to be part of the committee, but I have a couple of very concrete activities that I can engage in a decentralized manner. And I think that would, start engaging the whole community a bit more meaningfully.
Just to build on that, Pauline, and also something you said earlier about having a dedicated operational person, the time and capacity it takes to drive a program of action is enormous. It's enormous. And even though the committee might have, had good incentives in terms of travel and some training, it still is huge. And I was just wondering if it's realistic actually if the expectations of Dignitas are realistic in terms of that self-sustaining, generating independent organization, because it also takes a lot of time for that process to unfold and to build the ownership, the identity piece of it, in order to drive it forward, you definitely need that feeling part of it and owning it, and that takes time.
Just a quick note. You have about 2 minutes more to chat with each other. So final thoughts. This goes by really fast. But as you mentioned in the chat, everyone else, please press enter and share your ideas as well. So we'll have about 2 more minutes of a free flow of ideas from everybody right now. Go ahead.
Thanks, Brendan. I mean, Gillian, I think you're right. What's really happening here is, if you're building a sort of larger scale distributed community, it's a cultural shift, it's a strategic thing, and it takes a very long time. And sometimes even people who have experience with strategic planning or leading large organizations underestimate how quickly something can take root and become, have its own sort of self-propelled momentum. I did write, a couple of years ago, I wrote a white paper. I'm going to put the link in the chat because other people might find this interesting to read or download. And it has to do with something that Faith touched on, which is the difference between traditional, like educational alumni networks, like universities or schools, and professional or non-traditional alumni networks of other kinds of organizations. And I looked specifically at a couple of organizations that on the surface may not look like they have a lot in common with Dignitas network. However, I do think the principles that I tried to write about in the white paper are, there's the link, are relevant here. So in your own time, folks may want to download and read the white paper for some ideas about how to create a sense of community and the expectation of alumni engagement in an experience that maybe is not as immersive as spending 3 years at university in a residential environment where you're, really a long-term kind of creation of identity, and something short-term that's less traditional than many alumni networks.
I wanted to add on top of everything that we said, and I think, Andy, you mentioned that earlier, but I really think value organic development to a certain extent of a given community. So even if it's very important, of course, to take a step back and think and rethink the strategy, while doing so in parallel, I think it is still and always very important to make sure that the door remains open for any alumni in the meantime to reach out. So what we've been doing with a couple of communities that I'm in touch with, for example, is we have, say with Learning Planet, we have the monthly drop-in where if you are available and you want to chat for an informal conversation with other members, then you can do that. We also have the how are you emails that goes once every couple of weeks and says, hey, if you want to bounce ideas with other brain, or if you want to share ideas, then you can do so. And I've always been amazed about the kind of ideas that come out of just leaving the door open without even proposing something super concrete, just making sure that they have a space where they can express themselves and share ideas beyond the committee, because ideas and beautiful ideas can come from that too.
And just jumping on that, Pauline, which is absolutely lovely. Even the languaging, once you sort of think once you're rethinking the structural aspects of it, even the language. I know the African Leadership Academy uses the term ninja. I think they call them alumni ninja, which I love. But ambassadors, champions, rather than executive committee, sometimes also just shifts the thinking about, the perception of leadership and participation and who's included and excluded.
Last thought from me is real quick is if when we get back to measuring engagement, Faith asked about, how do you define it? I think sometimes it's okay to have fewer people more deeply involved, and that the definition of success is not necessarily getting as many people to participate as possible. Because I think if you have a bigger impact on the few people who do raise their hand and opt into a network's activities, that's a definition of success that goes deeper, even if it's not as broad or as numerous in the number of participants. So
a big thanks to Andy, Gillian, and Pauline for all of your ideas, to those who wrote in chat. To close, Faith, I'm just, this goes by so quickly, which is the point. We want to always leave you hungry for more. Faith, I'm going to ask you to turn in your video and just share one major takeaway in 30 seconds or less. One thing that you really took out of listening to everybody's comments.
All right, my takeaway to be gracious and to be realistic, not to expect too much self-reliant within a very short time, but also thinking of operationally having a dedicated team to be able to drive our mission and vision, and then looking deeper into the impact, even if it's engaging fewer people rather than trying to scale too widely with a lot more people.
Thanks, Faith, and thanks so much to everybody. As Yusa shared in the chat, we have a lot of other really exciting things going on at Enact, and a number of people that are on here are also part of our community, Nexus, which is a community that's trying to figure out how to do all of this work, and it's an open network. So both of the links are on there. You can also go to our InHive's webpage and find those links. I'd like to close with just allowing everybody to just unmute and say goodbye. Time is already up, so rather than just signing off, just kind of do a quick unmute and say goodbye. Give a thanks to Faith or to anybody you want to, and then leave the Zoom room.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Brendan, and
Thank you very much,
thank you for
everyone.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Faith. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, oh, is Faith gone? Is Faith? Brendan, I don't know if we're still recording, but I just wanted to say
Yes.
many of the
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, many of the problems that you've set out are things we've been through before, and if you wanted to chat about it offline, I've got a whole lot of other suggestions that
Right.
I'd be very happy to share, if you wanted to do that, and if it would be useful.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Gillian. I'll reach out.
Thanks, Gillian.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye, Olivier. Bye, Donita. Thanks so much, Faith. Oh, there we go.
All right. Bye.
That was fun. That was nice.
It was.
Um,
Ended up being pretty decent turnout, actually.
yeah, I was. Let's stop recording.